Marcus Chen had always believed that fixing alien technology would be straightforward. After all, he had spent 15 years as Earth's premier xenotech specialist, earning recognition across 3 solar systems for his ability to reverse engineer and repair equipment from dozens of different species. His small workshop on Luna Station had become legendary among traders, diplomats, and adventurers who needed their exotic gear restored to working condition. The morning everything changed started like any other. Marcus was hunched over his workbench, carefully examining a Zelithian gravity manipulator that had been brought in by a nervous merchant captain. The device hummed with residual energy, its crystalline core pulsing with an odd purple light that seemed to shift and dance when he wasn't looking directly at it. The captain had claimed it was a simple malfunction, but Marcus could sense something more complex at work. His workshop was a testament to his expertise. Shelves lined every wall, filled with components from across known space. Vorthan energy cells sat next to cretal neural interfaces, while modified human tools hung alongside implements designed by species whose names he couldn't even pronounce. The air recycler worked overtime to manage the various atmospheric requirements of different technologies, creating a unique blend of ozone, metallic tang, and something that always reminded him of cinnamon. The door chime announced a visitor, its tone automatically adjusting to match the gravitational frequency of whoever approached. Marcus looked up to see a figure that immediately commanded attention. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, with pale skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her hair was deep black with streaks of silver that moved independently, as if stirred by an unfelt breeze. Most striking were her eyes, deep crimson that seemed to glow with their own internal fire. "Marcus Chen," her voice carried an accent he couldn't place, melodious yet somehow predatory. "I am Serafina Valdris of House Nocturne. I require your services." Marcus set down his tools, immediately recognizing the formal speech patterns of noble-born aliens. In his experience, aristocrats from any species meant complicated jobs and even more complicated payment arrangements. "What can I help you with, Lady Valdris?" She glided forward with fluid grace, her long coat trailing behind her like liquid shadow. From within its folds, she produced a device that made Marcus's breath catch. It was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often were, a sphere of what looked like black metal, but which seemed to bend light around itself. Intricate patterns were etched across its surface, glowing with the same crimson as her eyes. "This is a Nocturne life essence regulator," she explained, placing it carefully on his workbench. "It has been in my family for over 3,000 years. Recently, it has begun to malfunction." Marcus leaned closer, his professional curiosity overriding his caution. The device radiated a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. "What exactly does it regulate?" Serafina's expression became guarded. "My people have certain dietary requirements that differ from most species. This device helps us process sustenance more efficiently, allowing us to interact with other beings without risk." That explanation raised more questions than it answered, but Marcus had learned not to pry too deeply into alien biology unless it was directly relevant to the repair. "What kind of malfunction are we talking about?" "It no longer maintains stable energy patterns. The fluctuations are becoming dangerous." She paused, her crimson eyes meeting his directly. "I have been to 17 different technicians across 4 systems. None have been able to even identify the problem, let alone fix it." Marcus felt the familiar thrill of a challenging puzzle. "And what makes you think I'll be different?" "Your reputation precedes you. They say you have an intuitive understanding of alien technology that borders on the supernatural." Her lips curved in what might have been a smile, revealing teeth that were just slightly too sharp. "I am prepared to offer substantial compensation for success." "How substantial?" Marcus asked, though he was already mentally cataloging the tools he would need to examine the device properly. Serafina reached into her coat again and produced a data pad. The screen displayed a number that made Marcus's eyes widen. It was enough to upgrade his entire workshop, maybe even buy a better location on one of the inner planets. "Half now, half upon completion," she said. "But I must warn you, this device is not just valuable to me personally. Without it functioning properly, I cannot safely remain in civilized space. If you cannot repair it within 1 standard week, I will be forced to return to my homeworld." Marcus studied the device more closely. The etchings seemed to pulse in rhythm with something he couldn't identify, not quite electrical, not quite biological. May I ask why returning home would be such a problem? For the first time since entering his workshop, Serafina's composed facade cracked slightly. My people are not exactly welcome in most parts of the galaxy. We have a complicated history with other species. This device allows me to maintain the control necessary to function in their societies. That statement sent a small chill down Marcus's spine, but his curiosity was stronger than his caution. I'll need to run some preliminary scans. The payment you're offering suggests this is more complex than a standard repair job. Indeed it is. Serafina transferred half the agreed amount to his account with a gesture. I will return tomorrow evening for your initial assessment. Please be careful, Mr. Chen. This device responds to biological signatures in ways that most technology does not. After she left, Marcus spent several minutes simply staring at the device. His standard scanning equipment revealed almost nothing useful. The black metal seemed to absorb most forms of energy he directed at it. Only when he switched to his most sensitive biological scanners did he get any meaningful readings. What he found made him step back from the workbench. The device was alive, or at least contained living components that were unlike anything in his extensive database. The patterns etched into its surface weren't decorative. They were some kind of neural network that pulsed with organic rhythms. More disturbing, it seemed to be responding to his presence, the pulsing growing stronger when he moved closer. Marcus had repaired living technology before. Several species used biomechanical hybrids for various purposes, but this felt different. This felt hungry. He spent the rest of the day researching House Nocturne and the species that might match Serafina's description. What he found in the galactic databases was fragmented and often contradictory, but certain themes emerged. References to a vampire-like species that fed on life energy rather than blood. Stories of noble houses that had been exiled from civilized space centuries ago for their dietary habits. Warnings about beings who could drain the life from other creatures with a touch. The more he read, the more he understood why Serafina's payment had been so generous. She wasn't just hearing him to repair a device. She was trusting him with her life. Without the regulator functioning properly, she would either have to flee civilization or risk losing control of whatever predatory instincts her species possessed. That evening, Marcus worked late into the night cycle, carefully probing the device with increasingly sophisticated tools. The bioneural network was incredibly complex, more advanced than anything he had encountered before. It seemed to be designed to interface directly with the user's nervous system, creating a feedback loop that could regulate biological processes at the cellular level. The malfunction appeared to be in one of the primary control nodes, where some kind of crystalline component had developed microfractures. But simply replacing the component wouldn't work. The entire system was integrated in ways that defied conventional understanding of technology. It would require rebuilding sections of the neural network while maintaining the delicate balance of the whole. As he worked, Marcus began to notice something strange happening to his own body. His hands seemed steadier than usual, his vision sharper. The chronic fatigue that had been bothering him for months was gone. Most remarkably, a scar on his arm from a childhood accident had begun to fade. It wasn't until he stepped away from the workbench that he realized what was happening. The device was somehow enhancing his biological functions, improving his body's natural healing and energy processes. The effect was subtle but unmistakable. He felt better than he had in years. When Serafina returned the following evening, Marcus had prepared a detailed analysis of the problem and a proposed solution. She listened intently as he explained the extent of the damage and the complexity of the repair. The good news is that I can fix it, he concluded. The bad news is that the process will require maintaining a direct interface between the device and a compatible biological system for approximately 72 hours while I rebuild the damaged sections. Serafina's expression grew troubled. That would require me to remain connected to the device during the repair process. Not necessarily, Marcus hesitated before continuing. The device seems to respond positively to human biological signatures. I could maintain the interface myself. Absolutely not. Her response was immediate and firm. You do not understand the risks involved. Then explain them to me. Marcus met her gaze steadily. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like this is the only way to complete the repair, and you said yourself that you can't return home. Serafina was quiet for a long moment, her crimson eyes studying his face. The device creates a biological link with its user. During the repair process, that link would extend to you as well. You would be connected to me in ways that your species was never designed to handle. What kind of connection? The device regulates my feeding instincts by creating a buffer between my metabolism and my conscious mind. If you interface with it directly, there would be no such buffer between us. You would be exposed to everything that I am. Marcus felt a chill at her words, but his determination didn't waver. And if I don't do this, I will leave Luna Station tonight and never return to civilized space. Seraphina's voice carried a note of genuine sadness. I will not risk harming innocent beings because my equipment failed. That seems like a waste of 3,000 years of technology and culture. Better that than becoming a monster. Marcus spent the next hour walking through his workshop, weighing the decision. The rational part of his mind cataloged all the ways this could go wrong. Interfacing with alien biotechnology always carried risks, and this particular device was designed for a species with dietary habits that sounded decidedly predatory. But the engineer in him was fascinated by the challenge. This was technology beyond anything humanity had developed, a chance to understand biological systems that had been perfected over millennia. More than that, he found himself genuinely concerned about Seraphina's situation. Despite her intimidating appearance and oblique warnings, she had been nothing but professional and courteous. When he finally returned to the main workshop, he found her preparing to pack the device. "I'll do it," he said simply. She paused, her hands hovering over the sphere. "You understand the risks." "I understand enough." Marcus moved to his equipment locker and began gathering the specialized tools he would need. "Besides, you said the interface would last 72 hours. How dangerous could it be?" Seraphina's laugh was soft but held little humor. "Mr. Chen, you may be about to discover just how much difference 3 days can make." As they prepared for the procedure, Marcus reflected on how quickly his simple life had become complicated. Just 2 days ago, his biggest concern had been whether to accept a lucrative contract to repair mining equipment on Titan. Now he was about to form a biological connection with an alien vampire to fix technology that regulated her predatory instincts. But as he watched Seraphina carefully position the device on the specially prepared interface platform, he realized he wasn't afraid. If anything, he felt more alive than he had in months. Whatever was about to happen, it would certainly be more interesting than another routine repair job. The preliminary connection established easily, almost eagerly. Marcus felt a strange, tingling sensation as the device's bioneural network reached out to interface with his nervous system. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then the real connection activated, and Marcus's world exploded into sensation unlike anything he had ever experienced. Through the link, he could feel Seraphina's presence as clearly as if she were standing inside his own mind. Her thoughts, her memories, her very essence flowed across the connection with overwhelming intensity. But most striking was what he felt from her in return, not the predatory hunger he had expected, but profound loneliness and carefully controlled desperation. She had been alone for so long that the simple sensation of mental contact with another being nearly brought her to tears. As the repair process began in earnest, Marcus realized that the next 3 days would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could have anticipated. What had started as a simple repair job was becoming something far more complex and personal. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he began to understand why 17 other technicians had failed to fix Seraphina's device. It wasn't just technology that needed repair. It was a connection between two beings that had been broken for far too long. The first 12 hours of the connection were overwhelming in ways Marcus had never imagined possible. Through the bioneural link, he experienced fragments of Seraphina's memories stretching back centuries. He saw the glory days of House Nocturne, when her people had been respected members of the galactic community, their unique abilities valued rather than feared. He witnessed the gradual decline as other species began to view them as parasites, the mounting paranoia that led to the Great Exile, and the lonely decades that followed. But it wasn't just memories that flowed across the link. Marcus could feel Seraphina's emotions as if they were his own, the constant struggle to suppress instincts that demanded she feed on the life energy of other beings, the exhaustion of maintaining rigid self-control every moment of every day, and underneath it all, a bone-deep loneliness that had been growing for over 200 years. What surprised him most was how human her emotions felt. Despite her alien appearance and predatory nature, her psychological landscape was remarkably familiar. She felt joy, sorrow, frustration, and hope in ways that resonated deeply with his own experiences. The repair work itself proved to be more challenging than Marcus had anticipated. The damaged control node was intricately connected to dozens of other components, and each repair attempt sent feedback through the bio-neural network that affected both of them. During one particularly delicate adjustment, the feedback surge caused Serafina to experience something like a feeding frenzy, her instincts momentarily overwhelming her conscious control. Marcus felt the hunger slam into him through the connection, not for food in any conventional sense, but for life energy itself. For a terrifying moment, he understood exactly what it meant to be a predator whose very existence depended on draining the vitality of other living beings. The sensation was simultaneously revolting and strangely compelling, like being offered a drug that he knew would destroy him, but which promised unimaginable pleasure. "I'm sorry," Serafina gasped, her mental voice tight with shame and effort as she regained control. "I should have warned you that the feedback could trigger my feeding response." "It's okay," Marcus replied, though his hands were shaking as he worked. "I'm beginning to understand why this device is so important to you." "You cannot possibly understand," she said, her mental tone bitter. "You felt a shadow of what I experience every day, the constant hunger, the effort required to resist it, the knowledge that one moment of weakness could kill someone." Marcus paused in his work, considering his response carefully. Through the link, he could sense that this was the heart of her pain, not just the isolation imposed by other species, but the self-imposed exile born from fear of her own nature. "You're right," he admitted. "I can't fully understand what that's like, but I can see how much strength it takes to maintain that level of control. That's not the mark of a monster, it's the mark of someone with extraordinary moral courage." Serafina's emotional response to his words was so intense that it nearly disrupted the connection entirely. Marcus felt her surprise, gratitude, and a desperate hope that she quickly tried to suppress. It had been so long since anyone had seen her as anything other than a predator to be feared or avoided. As they continued working, Marcus began to piece together the broader context of Serafina's situation. House Nocturne had not been exiled simply because of their feeding habits, but because of how they had chosen to adapt to changing galactic politics. Rather than hiding their nature or retreating to isolated worlds, they had attempted to find ways to coexist with other species through technology like the life essence regulator. The other noble houses of their species had viewed this as weakness, while the galactic community had seen it as a threat. Serafina was caught between two worlds, too alien for human space, too progressive for her own people. Her device represented more than just a feeding regulator. It was a bridge between species that neither side wanted to acknowledge. The repair work progressed slowly but steadily. Marcus found that his enhanced perception through the bio-neural link allowed him to sense problems in the device that his instruments couldn't detect. He could feel the flow of energy through the crystalline matrices, identify stress points in the organic components, and predict how changes to one system would affect the whole. But the connection was taking a toll on both of them. By the second day, Marcus was experiencing physical changes that concerned him. His body temperature had dropped several degrees, his metabolism had slowed significantly, and he found himself sleeping for only 2 or 3 hours at a time. Most disturbing, he had begun to sense the life energy of other beings in the station. Their warmth, their vitality, their essential aliveness called to something deep in his modified biology. "The changes are accelerating," Serafina observed during one of their brief rest periods. "The longer we maintain the connection, the more your physiology adapts to interface with the device." "Is that dangerous?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Unknown, no being of your species has ever undergone this type of biological modification. We are in uncharted territory." Marcus flexed his hands, noting how steady they had become, how precisely he could manipulate even the smallest components. "The changes aren't all negative. My manual dexterity has improved dramatically, my vision is sharper, and I can perceive energy patterns that were invisible to me before. Those are adaptations that allow you to interface more effectively with our technology," Serafina explained. "But they come with costs. Your body is becoming dependent on the energy flows that sustain the device. when we disconnect. We'll deal with that when the time comes, Marcus interrupted. For now, let's focus on completing the repair. Despite his confident words, Marcus was increasingly worried about what would happen when the connection ended. Through the link, he could sense that Serafina shared his concern, though she tried to hide it. Whatever was happening to him was unprecedented, and neither of them knew if the changes would be reversible. The breakthrough came during the third day, when Marcus realized that the device's malfunction wasn't purely mechanical. The bioneural network had been designed to adapt to its user over time, learning their specific biological patterns and psychological needs. But Serafina's centuries of isolation had caused the device to become too specialized, too attuned to her particular form of loneliness and repression. The device thinks you're still the same person you were when it was first calibrated, Marcus explained as he worked. But you've changed over the centuries. You've developed stronger self-control, different coping mechanisms, a more nuanced understanding of your own nature. The device needs to relearn who you are now. How do we accomplish that? Serafina asked. We don't just repair the damaged components. We reset the entire personality matrix. It will require the device to form a new baseline based on your current psychological state, rather than the patterns established centuries ago. The reset process was even more intensive than the repair work. It required Marcus to maintain multiple simultaneous connections between different parts of the bioneural network, while Serafina deliberately accessed her deepest memories and emotions. Through the link, Marcus experienced the full scope of her existence, not just the pain and isolation, but also moments of joy, wonder, and profound connection with the universe around her. He saw her first view of Earth from space, the moment when she realized that humans might be the key to her species' eventual reintegration into galactic society. He felt her determination to prove that her people could coexist peacefully with others, even if it meant spending centuries alone. Most powerfully, he experienced her reaction to their current connection, the overwhelming relief of finally being truly understood by another conscious being. But the reset process also exposed Marcus to the full intensity of Serafina's predatory nature. Through the link, he experienced what it was like to feed on life energy, to feel another being's vitality flowing into his own body, sustaining and strengthening him. The sensation was intoxicating in ways that terrified him, because part of him found it deeply appealing. Now you understand, Serafina said softly as the process neared completion. This is what I am, Marcus. This is what I must control every moment of every day. But it's not all you are, Marcus replied, his mental voice steady despite his exhaustion. You're also someone who chose to spend centuries alone rather than harm others, someone who sought out technology to help her coexist peacefully, someone who trusted a stranger with her life because the alternative was giving up everything she had worked for. The personality reset completed successfully, just as Marcus felt his strength beginning to fail. The enhanced abilities the connection had given him were fading as his body struggled to maintain the alien modifications. But the device was working perfectly now, its bioneural network humming with properly balanced energy patterns. The repair is complete, Marcus announced, though speaking required significant effort. The device should function normally for several centuries before requiring any maintenance. Thank you, Serafina said, her gratitude flowing across the link with overwhelming intensity. You have given me my life back. As they prepared to disconnect, Marcus realized that he didn't want the link to end. Despite the physical toll and the disturbing insights into predatory nature, the connection with Serafina had been the most profound experience of his life. For the first time in years, he had felt truly understood, truly valued for who he was rather than just what he could do. The disconnection will be difficult, Serafina warned. Your body has adapted to the energy flows of the device when those flows stop. I understand, Marcus said, though he wasn't sure he really did. The disconnection was brutal. Marcus felt as though part of his mind had been torn away, leaving behind a void that ached with phantom pain. His enhanced abilities vanished instantly, replaced by a weakness that seemed to permeate every cell of his body. But worse than the physical discomfort was the psychological isolation. After 3 days of intimate mental connection, being alone in his own mind felt like a form of sensory deprivation. Serafina carefully packaged the repaired device, her movements precise and economical. But Marcus could see the tension in her posture, the way she avoided looking at him directly. The second half of your payment has been transferred, she said formally. Is there anything else you require? Marcus struggled to his feet, his body protesting the simple movement. Just one thing, what happens now? Do you disappear back into the outer systems, or? I haven't decided. Serafina paused at the door of his workshop. For the first time in 2 centuries, I have options that will take some getting used to. If you ever need the device serviced again, or if you just want to talk to someone who understands what you're dealing with. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. After she left, Marcus spent several hours simply sitting in his workshop, trying to process what had happened. The connection with Serafina had changed him in ways that went far beyond the temporary physical modifications. He had seen the universe through the eyes of a being whose existence spanned centuries, whose very nature challenged conventional notions of morality and survival. More than that, he had experienced a level of intimacy and understanding that he hadn't known was possible. The relationships he had formed with other humans suddenly seemed shallow by comparison, limited by the barriers that language and separate consciousness imposed. But perhaps most significantly, Marcus had discovered something about himself that he had never suspected. The appeal of Serafina's predatory nature hadn't been entirely due to the bioneural connection. Some part of him had always been drawn to experiences that pushed beyond normal human limitations, to connections that transcended ordinary boundaries. As he prepared to close his workshop for the day, Marcus found himself hoping that Serafina would return. Not because her device needed repair, but because he wanted to continue exploring the connection they had discovered. The rational part of his mind warned him that such thoughts were dangerous, that pursuing a relationship with a being whose very nature was predatory would be the height of foolishness. But the part of him that had spent 3 days linked with an alien mind, experiencing emotions and sensations beyond human understanding, found that danger more appealing than frightening. 3 days ago, Marcus Chen had been a successful but lonely technician whose greatest excitement came from solving mechanical puzzles. Now he was someone who had touched the infinite, who had experienced connection beyond the boundaries of species and consciousness itself. The universe had suddenly become a much more interesting place. 3 weeks passed before Marcus heard from Serafina again, and by that time he had nearly convinced himself that their connection had been nothing more than a side effect of the bioneural interface. The withdrawal symptoms from the disconnection had been severe, crushing fatigue, sensory dullness, and a persistent feeling that the world around him had somehow become less real. But gradually, his body had readjusted to normal human limitations. His workshop felt different now, smaller somehow. The routine repairs and modifications that had once challenged and satisfied him now seemed trivial. He found himself staring at alien technologies and wondering what it would be like to interface with them directly, to understand their function from the inside as he had with Serafina's device. The message came through his private communication channel late one evening. It was brief and formal, requesting a consultation regarding additional modifications to previously serviced equipment. But something in the phrasing made Marcus's pulse quicken with anticipation. Serafina arrived the following night, and Marcus immediately noticed the changes in her. She moved with more confidence, her posture less guarded. The carefully controlled tension that had characterized her previous visit was still present, but it seemed more like focused alertness than barely contained fear. "The device is functioning perfectly," she reported, placing the familiar black sphere on his workbench. "However, I find myself in need of your expertise for a different matter." "What kind of matter?" Marcus asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. Serafina hesitated, her crimson eyes studying his face intently. "I have been thinking about our connection during the repair process. The link we shared was unprecedented in my experience. It has made me reconsider certain assumptions about the limitations imposed by my nature." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. "What kind of assumptions?" "For centuries, I believed that meaningful relationships with other species were impossible for my kind. Our predatory instincts, our feeding requirements, our extended lifespans, all of these seem to create insurmountable barriers. But the connection we shared suggests that such barriers might not be as absolute as I thought." She reached into her coat and produced a second device, smaller than the first but clearly related. It was elegant in its simplicity, a pair of matching circlets that pulsed with the same crimson energy as her eyes. "I have been developing a modified version of the life essence regulator, one designed to create controlled bioneural links between compatible beings. The theory is that such a link could allow my species to form genuine connections with others without the risk of uncontrolled feeding. Marcus examined the circlets more closely. The craftsmanship was exquisite, combining traditional nocturne biotechnology with innovations that he suspected had been inspired by their shared connection. You created these yourself. I have had considerable time to develop my technical skills, Serafina replied with what might have been amusement. The question is whether they will function as intended. The only way to test them properly is with a willing partner who has already demonstrated compatibility with our bioneural technology. The implications of her request were clear, and Marcus found himself torn between excitement and caution. The connection they had shared during the repair process had been the most profound experience of his life, but it had also exposed him to aspects of Serafina's nature that were genuinely dangerous. What exactly would this involve? He asked. The circlets would create a controlled link between our nervous systems, similar to what we experienced before, but with built-in safeguards. The connection could be maintained for extended periods without the physical stress of interfacing directly with the regulator. More importantly, it would allow for genuine emotional and psychological intimacy while preventing uncontrolled energy transfer. Marcus picked up one of the circlets, feeling the subtle vibration of its bioneural components. And if something goes wrong, then we disconnect immediately and consider the experiment a failure. Serafina's expression was serious but hopeful. I understand the risks I'm asking you to take, Marcus, but the potential benefits. Benefits for who? Marcus interrupted. You're talking about finding a way to form relationships with other species, but what's in it for me? Serafina was quiet for a long moment, her gaze dropping to the workbench. I suppose I assumed that you had found our previous connection as meaningful as I did. The vulnerability in her voice made Marcus realize how his question must have sounded. I did, he said quickly. I'm sorry that came out wrong. I meant, what are the long-term implications for humans who form these connections? What happens to us? Unknown, she admitted. You would be the first. But the modifications should be less dramatic than what you experienced before, and they should be sustainable over time rather than causing gradual deterioration. Marcus stared at the circlets, weighing the decision. On one hand, he was being asked to participate in an untested experiment that could have unknown consequences for his long-term health and psychological well-being. On the other hand, the connection with Serafina had shown him possibilities he had never imagined, forms of intimacy and understanding that transcended the normal limitations of separate consciousness. There's something else you should know, Serafina said softly. I have been investigating the galactic community's current attitude toward my people. The political situation has shifted significantly in recent decades. There are movements within several species advocating for the rehabilitation of the nocturne, conditional on our ability to demonstrate that we can coexist peacefully with others. You're talking about ending the exile, Marcus realized. Eventually, perhaps, but such a change would require proof that we have overcome our predatory nature through technology rather than simple isolation. A successful long-term connection between one of my kind and a member of another species would be powerful evidence. The broader implications of what she was proposing began to sink in. This wasn't just about their personal relationship. It was potentially about the future of an entire species. If they could demonstrate that nocturne could form stable, non-exploitative relationships with other beings, it might pave the way for thousands of Serafina's people to return to civilized space. How long have you been planning this? Marcus asked. Since the moment our connection stabilized during the repair process, Serafina admitted. The intensity and quality of the link we achieved was beyond anything I had thought possible. It made me realize that the barriers between species might be more psychological than biological. Marcus picked up the second circlet, noting how it seemed to respond to his touch with gentle warmth. And if the experiment is successful, if we can maintain a stable connection without negative side effects, then we would have achieved something unprecedented in galactic history, true interspecies intimacy. The implications for diplomacy, cultural exchange, and mutual understanding would be staggering. The engineer in Marcus was fascinated by the challenge, but the human in him was focused on more personal considerations. What would it mean for us personally? Day to day, I mean. Serafina's expression softened. I don't know. I have no experience with genuine partnership, Marcus. For over 2 centuries, I have been alone by necessity and choice. The idea of sharing my thoughts, my emotions, my very existence with another being is both terrifying and wonderful. But you want to try? Yes, she said without hesitation. More than I have wanted anything in decades. Marcus set down the circlet and looked directly into her crimson eyes. Before I agree to this, I need you to be completely honest with me about one thing. During our previous connection, I felt your feeding instincts. I experienced what it was like to drain life energy from another being. Part of me found that appealing, which scares me. What happens if those instincts become permanent? Serafina nodded, her expression grave. That is the greatest risk we face. The bioneural connection could potentially trigger dormant predatory traits in human psychology. If that happened, you could become something like my kind, requiring life energy to sustain yourself, feeling the constant hunger that drives us. Would that necessarily be a bad thing? Marcus asked, surprising himself with the question. You would no longer be entirely human, Serafina pointed out. Your relationships with your own kind would become complicated. Your lifespan would be extended dramatically, but at the cost of dietary requirements that most humans would find abhorrent. Marcus considered this for several minutes. The logical choice was obvious: decline the experiment and maintain his normal human existence. But the memory of the connection they had shared, the profound sense of understanding and intimacy, made that option feel like a retreat into loneliness and limitation. What safeguards have you built into the new devices? He asked finally. Multiple layers of protection, Serafina replied, her relief at his continued interest evident. The connection can be severed instantly by either party. Energy transfer is regulated to prevent uncontrolled feeding. Most importantly, the link includes constant monitoring of both participants' biological and psychological states. And if problems develop, we disconnect immediately and seek ways to reverse any negative effects. She paused. I will not allow you to be harmed by my choices, Marcus. If there is any sign that the connection is dangerous for you, I will end it regardless of my own desires. The sincerity in her voice convinced Marcus that she meant it. Despite her predatory nature, despite the risks involved, he trusted her to prioritize his well-being over her own needs. All right, he said, reaching for one of the circlets. Let's make history. The initial connection was gentle, almost tentative. Marcus felt Serafina's mental presence touch his consciousness like a whispered greeting, warm and welcoming without the overwhelming intensity of their previous link. The safeguards were immediately apparent. He could sense the regulatory systems monitoring their connection, ready to intervene if dangerous patterns developed. But within those safety parameters, the intimacy was extraordinary. Marcus could feel Serafina's emotions directly, her excitement at the success of her new technology, her profound gratitude for his trust, and underneath it all, a deep affection that made his breath catch. It works, Serafina said aloud, though her mental voice carried the same words with layers of meaning that speech couldn't convey. The connection is stable and safe. Marcus explored the link carefully, marveling at how different it felt from their previous experience. Where before he had been overwhelmed by the intensity of raw bioneural interface, now he felt as though he were having a conversation conducted in emotions and sensations rather than words. How do you feel? Serafina asked, both verbally and mentally. Like I've been given a new sense, Marcus replied, experimenting with communicating through the link. It's incredible. They spent the next several hours testing the capabilities and limitations of the connection. They discovered that they could share not just emotions, but complex thoughts, memories, and even sensory experiences. Marcus could see through Serafina's eyes, experience her enhanced perceptions of energy patterns and life forces around them. In return, she could access his technical understanding of the devices they had created together. But perhaps most remarkably, the connection seemed to enhance rather than diminish their individual personalities. Rather than losing himself in Serafina's alien psychology, Marcus found that their differences created a kind of cognitive harmony, each mind complementing the other's strengths and compensating for their weaknesses. As the hours passed, Marcus realized that this was just the beginning. They had created not just a technological marvel, but a new form of relationship that could revolutionize how different species interacted with each other. The implications were staggering, and they had taken the first steps into an entirely new realm of possibility. But success in the laboratory was only the beginning. If they were going to prove that such connections could work in the real world, they would need to test their relationship under normal conditions, dealing with the practical challenges of daily life while maintaining their unprecedented bond. The real experiment was just beginning. Living with a permanent bioneural connection proved to be more complex than Marcus had anticipated. In the weeks following their successful initial test, he and Serafina discovered that sharing consciousness on a daily basis required constant negotiation and adjustment. Simple activities like sleeping, eating, or even concentrating on work became exercises in coordination and mutual consideration. The first major challenge arose when Marcus tried to maintain his normal client schedule while connected to Serafina. The enhanced perception the link provided was incredibly useful for technical work, but having another consciousness present during delicate repairs was often distracting. Serafina experienced similar difficulties when attempting to conduct her own research while sharing her mental space with a human perspective. "We need to establish protocols," Serafina suggested after a particularly frustrating morning where Marcus had been unable to complete a routine navigation system calibration because her thoughts kept interfering with his concentration. "Ways to maintain privacy and individual focus when necessary." They developed a system of mental barriers within the connection, areas of consciousness that could be temporarily shielded from sharing. It required discipline and practice, but eventually they learned to modulate their link from complete openness to selective sharing to near-complete privacy while maintaining the underlying bond. The social implications of their relationship proved even more challenging than the practical ones. Luna Station's diverse population included representatives from dozens of species, many of whom had strong opinions about the Nocturne and their history. When word spread that Marcus was involved with Serafina, reactions ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. The situation came to a head when a delegation of Zelithian diplomats lodged a formal complaint with station management, claiming that harboring an uncontrolled predator violated interspecies safety protocols. The station administrator, a pragmatic centauri named Valdek Moore, called Marcus to his office for what he termed a frank discussion about liability issues. "I understand you've developed some kind of personal relationship with the Nocturne individual," Valdek said without preamble. "While I have no authority over your private life, I need to know if this situation poses any risk to station security." Marcus had prepared for this conversation, but found that having Serafina's presence in his mind made it easier to remain calm and focused. Through their link, he could feel her steady support and her complete confidence in his ability to handle the situation diplomatically. "Lady Serafina poses no threat to anyone on this station," Marcus replied firmly. "Her technology specifically prevents the kind of uncontrolled feeding that the Zelithians are concerned about. More importantly, our relationship has given us insights that could benefit the entire galactic community." "Explain," Valdek ordered, his four eyes focusing intently on Marcus. Marcus spent the next hour describing the bioneural connection technology and its implications for interspecies cooperation. He was careful to present their work in terms of potential diplomatic and economic benefits rather than personal relationship issues. Through the link, he felt Serafina's approval of his approach and her suggestions for technical details that would be most convincing. "You're claiming that this technology could enable genuine understanding between species that have been enemies for centuries," Valdek summarized when Marcus finished. "Not just understanding, true empathy, the ability to experience another being's perspective directly, to understand their motivations and fears from the inside." Marcus leaned forward, letting his enthusiasm show. "Think about the implications for trade negotiations, conflict resolution, cultural exchange. We could be looking at a fundamental shift in how species interact with each other." Valdek considered this for several minutes, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "I'm going to authorize a limited research program. You and Lady Serafina will be granted station research status, which will protect you from interference by visiting diplomats. In return, I want regular reports on your progress and complete transparency about any developments that could affect station security." The research status legitimized their work in the eyes of the galactic community, but it also brought new pressures. Scientists and diplomats from multiple species requested demonstrations of the bio-neural connection technology. Some were genuinely interested in its potential benefits, while others seemed more concerned with understanding its capabilities as a potential weapon. Marcus found himself giving presentations to audiences that ranged from sympathetic xenobiologists to suspicious military officers. The most challenging session came when a group of Nocturne nobles arrived unannounced, demanding to know why Seraphina was prostituting her heritage to inferior species. The confrontation took place in the station's main conference chamber, with Seraphina facing 3 members of House Mortis, one of the most traditionalist Nocturne families. Their leader, a tall male named Draco Mortis, radiated the kind of casual arrogance that came from centuries of unchallenged authority. "You dishonor our entire species with this pathetic display," he declared, his voice carrying the formal cadences of ancient Nocturne nobility. "Connecting our sacred bioneural technology to an inferior human consciousness. Have you no pride in what you are?" Marcus felt Seraphina's anger through their link, but also her deep hurt at being rejected by her own kind. He started to respond, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. "What I am," Seraphina replied calmly, "is someone who has found a way for our people to return to civilized space without compromising our essential nature. What I am is someone who has proven that the barriers between species are not as absolute as you believe." "Barriers exist for good reason," Draco shot back. "We are apex predators. Our proper place is above other species, not mingling with them as equals." "And how has that philosophy served us?" Seraphina's voice carried centuries of frustration. "We have been exiled for over 400 years because of that kind of thinking. Our people waste away in isolation while the galaxy moves on without us." The argument continued for over an hour, with the traditionalist Nocturne becoming increasingly hostile and Seraphina growing more passionate in her defense of integration. Through their connection, Marcus could feel the emotional toll the confrontation was taking on her. These were not just political opponents, but representatives of the culture she had been trying to rejoin. Finally, Marcus decided to intervene. "With respect," he said, addressing Draco directly, "you're arguing about philosophical positions while ignoring practical realities. Seraphina and I have achieved something that your people have claimed was impossible, a stable, mutually beneficial relationship between a Nocturne and another species. Instead of condemning that achievement, perhaps you should be asking how it could be replicated." "You think we want to replicate your perversion?" Draco's contempt was obvious. "You are nothing but cattle that has learned to speak. The idea that one of our kind would lower herself to form an emotional attachment with livestock is disgusting." Marcus felt Seraphina's rage spike through their connection, but before she could respond, he stood up calmly. "Lady Seraphina is not the one diminishing herself in this conversation. You are. You're so committed to a superiority complex that you can't recognize genuine innovation when you see it." "How dare you?" "Dare I what? Point out that your species' proud isolation has left you irrelevant to galactic civilization. That while you've been nursing wounded pride in the outer systems, other species have been advancing technologically, culturally, and diplomatically." Marcus kept his voice level, but let his conviction show. "Seraphina has developed technology that could bring your people back to prominence, and your response is to insult her for caring about something other than maintaining an obsolete hierarchy." The confrontation ended with the traditionalist Nocturne storming out, but not before Draco delivered a final threat. "House Mortis does not forget insults, human. Neither does House Nocturne forget traitors." After they left, Seraphina slumped in her chair, emotionally exhausted. Through their link, Marcus felt the depth of her disappointment. She had hoped that success with the bio-neural connection might convince her people to reconsider their isolationist stance. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I should have expected that reaction from the traditional houses." "Don't apologize for other people's narrow-mindedness," Marcus replied, taking her hand. "Besides, not all of your people think like House Mortis. There have to be some who are interested in progress over pride." His prediction proved correct when, several days later, they received a message from a group calling themselves the Nocturne Progressive Coalition. Unlike the traditional nobles, these representatives were younger Nocturne who had grown up in exile and were eager to find ways back to mainstream galactic society. The meeting with the progressives was dramatically different from the confrontation with House Mortis. Led by a female named Lyra Shadowmere, they listened intently to descriptions of the bio-neural connection technology and asked detailed questions about its potential applications. "What you've achieved represents the future of our species," Lyra declared after reviewing their research data. "Not just the technology itself, but the philosophical breakthrough it represents. You've proven that we can maintain our essential nature while forming genuine connections with other beings." "The traditional houses won't accept that easily," Serafina warned. "They view any compromise with other species as weakness." "The traditional houses are living in the past," Lyra replied dismissively. "Most of our people are tired of exile, tired of isolation. If you can demonstrate that integration is possible without losing what makes us nocturne, you'll have more support than you realize." The Progressive Coalition offered to sponsor broader testing of the bio-neural connection technology, connecting Marcus and Serafina with volunteer researchers from multiple species. But they also warned that such expansion would bring greater risks. "Once this technology becomes widely known, it will attract attention from parties who view it as a potential weapon," Lyra explained. "The ability to form bio-neural connections could be seen as a form of mental invasion or control. You'll need to be prepared for that." As if to underscore her warning, they received word that Galactic Intelligence had opened an investigation into their research. Officials wanted to understand the technology's potential military applications and assess whether it posed a security threat to member species. Marcus realized that their simple relationship had become the center of a complex web of political and technological implications. What had started as a repair job had evolved into something that could reshape interspecies relations throughout the galaxy. But as he felt Serafina's thoughts intertwining with his own through their permanent connection, Marcus knew that whatever challenges they faced, they would face them together. They had created something unprecedented, not just technologically, but personally. They had proven that love and understanding could transcend the boundaries of species, biology, and evolutionary history. The universe was watching their experiment, some with hope and others with fear. But Marcus and Serafina were no longer just two individuals exploring an unusual relationship. They had become symbols of possibility, representatives of a future where the barriers between species might finally begin to fall. 6 months after their first bio-neural connection, Marcus and Serafina found themselves at the center of the largest interspecies cooperation initiative in galactic history. Their relationship had evolved from a personal experiment to a prototype for an entirely new form of diplomatic and cultural exchange. The Galactic Council had established the Integration Protocol Program, with their research as its foundation, and representatives from over 30 species had requested to participate in bio-neural connection trials. The transformation had not been without costs. Marcus had undergone permanent physiological changes that made him something more than human, but less than nocturne. His lifespan had been extended dramatically, his physical capabilities enhanced, and his dietary requirements altered in ways that occasionally required life energy supplementation. But rather than feeling diminished, he experienced these changes as an expansion of his essential self. The morning that would change everything started with an emergency alert from the Galactic Intelligence Service. Director Kellis Vane, a senior Altarian official, arrived at Luna Station with a full security detail and a classified briefing that sent chills through everyone who heard it. "We have confirmed reports that House Mortis has allied with the Creedal Supremacy to develop weaponized versions of your bio-neural connection technology," Director Vane announced without preamble. "They call it the Domination Protocol, a system designed to override the consciousness of other species and establish permanent mental control." Marcus felt Serafina's shock and horror through their link. The technology they had created to build bridges between species was being perverted into an instrument of conquest. "How is that possible?" Serafina demanded. "The bio-neural connection requires willing participation from both parties. The safeguards prevent forced links." "House Mortis has access to traditional nocturne biotechnology that predates your innovations," Director Vane explained. "Combined with Creedal neural manipulation techniques, they've apparently found ways to bypass consensual requirements. Intelligence suggests they've already tested the system on unwilling subjects." The implications were staggering. If the Domination Protocol became operational, it could be used to mentally enslave entire populations, turning the bioneural connection from a tool of understanding into the ultimate weapon of oppression. "What do you need from us?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "We need you to help us develop countermeasures. Your understanding of the technology's fundamental principles makes you our best hope for creating defenses against its weaponized version." The next several weeks were a blur of intensive research and development. Marcus and Serafina worked around the clock with a team of specialists from multiple species, racing to create protective protocols before House Mortys could deploy their weapon. The work was complicated by the need to preserve the beneficial aspects of bioneural connection while blocking its malicious applications. Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While analyzing data from their own connection, they discovered that the emotional bond they had formed created a kind of psychological firewall that made forced domination impossible. Love, trust, and genuine empathy generated neural patterns that were incompatible with coercive control. "The weapon only works on beings who are isolated from meaningful emotional connections," Serafina explained to the research team. "But individuals who have formed deep bonds with others, romantic, familial, or even strong friendships, are naturally protected." "You're saying that the defense against mental domination is love?" Director Vane seemed skeptical. "Not love specifically, but genuine emotional intimacy," Marcus clarified. "The neural pathways created by close relationships create interference patterns that prevent forced bioneural connections from establishing control." It was a discovery that had implications far beyond their immediate crisis. The research showed that species with strong social bonds were naturally resistant to mental manipulation, while isolated individuals were vulnerable. The solution wasn't just technological but social. Communities that fostered deep connections between their members would be protected against domination weapons. But developing the theoretical defense was only the first step. House Mortys had already begun deploying their weapon, starting with isolated settlements in the outer systems where their activities would draw minimal attention. The reports coming back were horrifying: entire communities transformed into mindless servants, their individuality erased by forced bioneural control. The Galactic Council authorized immediate military intervention, but traditional weapons were useless against enemies who could turn captured soldiers into additional controllers. The only effective response required teams of bioneural specialists who could maintain protective connections while engaging the enemy. Marcus found himself leading one such team, accompanied by Serafina and 6 other pairs of bonded individuals from various species. Their mission was to infiltrate a House Mortys facility on a remote asteroid and disable the domination protocol systems before they could be deployed on a larger scale. The journey to the target facility gave Marcus time to reflect on how dramatically his life had changed. A year ago, he had been a solitary technician whose most complex relationship was with his equipment. Now he was part of an unprecedented union with an alien consciousness, leading a military mission that could determine the future of interspecies relations. "Are you having second thoughts?" Serafina asked through their connection as they approached the asteroid. "About the mission? No," Marcus replied. "About us? Never, though I have to admit I never expected that fixing your device would lead to this." "Neither did I," she admitted, "but I cannot imagine facing any of this without you." The facility was heavily defended, but House Mortys had not anticipated attackers who were immune to their primary weapon. The domination protocol controllers found themselves unable to establish mental dominance over the bonded pairs, while the attacking teams could move freely through their defenses. The battle itself was unlike anything in recorded military history. Instead of explosions and energy weapons, the conflict was fought primarily on psychological and bioneural levels. Marcus and his team had to navigate through areas where reality itself seemed unstable, where the forced connections created by the domination protocol had warped the consciousness of everything in the facility. They found the primary control center deep within the asteroid, where Draco Mortys himself was overseeing the final calibrations of a massive domination protocol array. The device was designed to project forced bioneural connections across multiple star systems simultaneously, potentially enslaving billions of beings. "You cannot stop what has already begun," Draco declared when he saw them enter. "The age of species equality is over. the Nocturne will resume our rightful place as masters of the galaxy. You're destroying everything our species once stood for, Serafina replied, her voice filled with sadness as much as anger. We were never meant to be conquerors. We were meant to be bridges between different forms of consciousness. The confrontation that followed was fought on multiple levels simultaneously. While Marcus worked to disable the domination protocol array, Serafina engaged Drackle in a bioneural duel that tested the limits of their species' mental capabilities. Through their connection, Marcus could feel the immense strain she was under as she fought to prevent Drackle from accessing the facility's systems. The breakthrough came when Marcus realized that the array could be turned against itself. Instead of broadcasting forced connections, he reprogrammed it to generate the same protective interference patterns that naturally bonded individuals possessed. The result was a wave of emotional resonance that swept across the facility, severing all forced bioneural connections and restoring free will to Drackle's victims. Drackle himself was caught in the feedback surge and collapsed, his consciousness overloaded by the sudden reversal of his own weapon. He survived, but his ability to form bioneural connections was permanently damaged, a fitting punishment for someone who had tried to use such connections to enslave others. In the aftermath of the mission, the Galactic Council officially recognized bioneural connection technology as both a legitimate tool for interspecies cooperation and a potential weapon requiring careful regulation. The Integration Protocol program was expanded, but with strict safeguards to prevent misuse. Marcus and Serafina found themselves celebrated throughout the galaxy as heroes who had prevented a new form of slavery from taking hold. But more than that, they had proven that genuine emotional connections could overcome even the most sophisticated attempts at mental domination. 6 months later, they stood before the Galactic Assembly as it voted to officially end the Nocturne exile. The demonstration that House Nocturne's progressive faction could form beneficial relationships with other species had convinced enough members that integration was possible. "The motion passes," announced the Assembly President. "House Nocturne and all related Nocturne families are hereby welcomed back to full membership in the galactic community, conditional on their adoption of bioneural connection protocols that ensure consensual interaction with other species." Serafina's joy at her people's redemption flowed through their connections so powerfully that Marcus felt tears in his own eyes. After centuries of exile, the Nocturne could finally come home. That evening, as they stood on the observation deck of Luna Station watching ships from dozens of species arrive to begin formal diplomatic relations with the returning Nocturne, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your device hadn't malfunctioned?" he asked. "Often," Serafina replied, both aloud and through their connection. "But I prefer to think it wasn't a malfunction at all. Perhaps it was destiny, the universe's way of bringing together two beings who needed each other to become more than they could ever be alone." Marcus smiled, feeling the truth of her words resonate through every level of their shared consciousness. What had started as a simple repair job had become something that transformed not just their own lives, but the fundamental nature of how species related to each other throughout the galaxy. In the end, the reward had been anything but simple. Marcus had gained not just a partner, but a connection that transcended every boundary he had previously understood. Together, they had proven that love could overcome fear, that understanding could bridge any gap, and that the universe was vast enough to accommodate every form of consciousness that chose to reach out in genuine connection to another. As they watched the first joint human Nocturne research vessel launch from the station, beginning a new era of interspecies exploration and cooperation, Marcus knew that this was only the beginning. The bioneural connection technology would continue to evolve, creating new possibilities for understanding between beings who had once thought themselves fundamentally incompatible. And at the center of it all would be their relationship, proof that sometimes the most profound changes in the universe begin with two individuals willing to trust each other enough to share their deepest selves. The reward for that trust had been greater than either of them could have imagined, and its implications would ripple throughout the galaxy for generations to come. Marcus Chen had started as a xenotech specialist who fixed alien equipment. He had become something unprecedented, a human who had successfully bonded with a member of a predatory species, proving that the barriers between different forms of life were not as absolute as anyone had believed. And in doing so, he had helped create a future where the universe itself was a more connected, more understanding place. The reward was meant to be simple. Instead, it had become infinite.